I'm Tori, and today I'm going to be discussing Fledgling by Octavia E. Butler. I listened to the audiobook narrated by Tracy Lee. This story follows a person who wakes up in a cave in the woods with terrible injuries, including major head trauma, and absolutely no memory of her past life. She has the appearance of an 11-year-old girl, but it's clear that her mind is much more sophisticated than that, and that she is not actually human. So I really enjoyed this book. It's a very creative take on the vampire mythology, and I thought it was fascinating. It was published in 2005, which was the same year that Twilight was published, and kind of Twilight led to this whole craze of vampire media. There were some things before it, but it really ignited this trend that lasted for quite a few years of all these vampire stories that were very similar. So it was interesting to read this book, which is nothing like Twilight or any of the other typical vampire stories you think of, and it was just such a creative and thought-provoking approach to vampires. So if you want to read a very unique, well-done, and creative standalone vampire story, I recommend that you go read this book, then come back to hear my opinions. So I love the vampires in this book. The Aina were so fascinating, and everything about them and their culture and the ways that they interacted with the world made sense, and you could see how their species could come to exist and how it would be able to survive very well in our world. It was so interesting to be inside Shori's head because she was so logical and cool-headed. And I'm thinking that was supposed to be an Aina trait, but even compared to the other Aina, she seemed like she thought things out so well, and she still felt emotions very strongly. She had very strong reactions, she was very attached to the people in her life, but she was still very calm and reasonable. And you definitely got the feeling that she was not human, that her mind worked differently, that she was something else. I loved it that she was black and that her family had purposely planned it that way. There are so many vampire stories out there, and almost all of them include the feature that vampires are harmed by the sun in some way. And I'm amazed that I haven't read about a black vampire before, because it makes so much sense. If the sun can kill or harm you, then having more melanin is definitely an advantage. And you would think that more vampire myths would focus on that and would want to see how that would affect a vampire's ability to survive. I was also very fascinated by the vampire aging process because their bodies seem to age kind of in proportion to how our bodies would age. You spend the same fraction of your life looking like an infant, looking like a toddler, looking like a teenager, looking like an adult. It's just that each phase lasts much longer and you live for hundreds and hundreds, if not maybe thousands of years. And physically that makes sense. Their bodies still deteriorate over time, their bodies still age. But I was really fascinated by the mental elements because Shori has been alive for 53 years and she has the body of a human 11-year-old. But she has the mind of someone who is much closer to being a human 53 years old. And that tells me that even though the vampires' bodies age very slowly, their minds age at the same rate that humans do. And I wished we could have had more scenes with infant vampires, because a vampire who had been alive for 25 or 30 years would probably still be an infant who could maybe not even walk yet. I'm not quite sure how fast their bodies would age, but they would have all the mental capability of an adult. And that seems like a very cruel way to spend the first 100 years of your life. As somebody who has all of the mental capabilities of an adult, who can make all the choices of an adult, who has the same sexual desires as an adult, the ability to take care of themselves, the ability to do well at a job, all these things that make you an adult. But to humans, they look like children, and then the vampires treat them as children too. Even though they're clearly capable, everything we saw in the story made it appear like the vampire children had all the mental capability of adults, but they were still treated as children. And that would be so frustrating. I also thought it was interesting that for Aina and their symbionts, love is almost an entirely biological phenomenon. So the symbionts are bitten, and after they've been bitten, they're given a choice to leave if they want to, but they are already kind of addicted to this drug, and they're very emotionally connected to the Aina, so very few of them would actually choose to leave, and then very soon it would kill them to leave. So they don't really have much of a choice in how their life goes, but the Aina don't really either. They choose their symbionts based a lot on convenience, and also on how that symbiont smells to them, so that makes me think it's kind of a pheromonal biological thing. And then as soon as they bite them, they begin to fall in love with them. And it's this very deep emotional bond. And when the Aina mate, it's the same way as well. They make good political connections, and the most desirable pairings are the ones that smell good to each other, implying that they would have good, strong genetic offspring or something. So all of these different, very emotional, very compelling relationships in an Aina's life are pretty much entirely biology. And the way the book presented it, all the people in these relationships are still very emotionally fulfilled. They get a lot out of these relationships. They really, truly love each other. But it's almost completely based on their biology. And it's just kind of an interesting experiment to think about what life would be like if it really worked that way. And even though all these people seem happy, I guess partly because the Aina have the ability to smooth conflicts and calm people down and make them feel calmer and make them feel not jealous and not angry. That would help. And then the mated Aina don't actually spend much time with each other. They just kind of reproduce and then go their separate ways. It just made for a very interesting dynamic. All the people in these relationships were pretty much happy. They enjoyed their relationships. They very much cared about each other. But it also felt like they didn't make very much choice in that. And that even if they weren't unhappy with their situation, maybe we should be unhappy on their behalf. I was also fascinated by the way the Aina counted groups of siblings as kind of one person. So you would have a family of sisters and a family of brothers, and they would kind of marry and all mate together, and all the children they had would count all of those people as parents equally, regardless of who their genetic parent was. And that was just such an interesting concept. Everything about the Aina, it was very much geared toward group living and having people working together to support each other. And that is a nice idea. It's nice to think that people could be so supportive of each other and work together to be there for their children and raise them together supportively. And I really didn't expect it to work, and I was kind of uncomfortable with it at the beginning, but this whole arrangement did seem to genuinely make them happy. I did think it was hilarious when the Aina compared themselves to humans, because they clearly thought that they were far superior. We had that whole scene when Shori is first learning about the legal system, and she says, "Oh, human legal systems are ridiculous because everything is based on how good of a performer your lawyer is. That's terrible. It shouldn't be about who has the best lawyer and who knows how to manipulate the system best. It should be about finding the truth. In the Aina system, all we do is find the truth." And then she proceeds to explain how incredibly corrupt the Aina justice system is, and how even though vampires can conclusively tell if somebody is lying, they might ignore this to support their friends. And by the time this whole explanation of the Aina justice system is done, it sounds just as corrupt as the human justice system, if not more so. And the Aina also claimed that they were not racist. Being racist is a human thing. And the vampires who hated Shori said that they hated her because she had been genetically modified and because she was part human and not completely Aina. And they claimed that vampires didn't really care about the color of your skin, but they still used all the human slurs for black people and did the best they could to belittle Shori based on the color of her skin, even though it was a huge biological advantage for them. And pretty much all vampires' lives would be better if they were black too. They still were horrible to her. This was such a good book. I loved how complex and rich this world was, and how much of it made sense for the vampire's survival, and it really felt like these creatures could exist. And I loved watching Shori try to find her place in this world and navigate all the complicated legal and social issues and try to find some closure from the horrible things that had happened to her and start a new life and try to move forward and make things better. I really enjoyed this book, and I will definitely be looking for more writing by Octavia E. Butler in the future.